In the wake of the Joe Kent resignation, in the wake of the Donald Trump Truth Social posts where he celebrates and defends figures like Mark Levin, a lot of patriots feel as though we're in a little bit of a patriot predicament here. We're sort of reading the writing on the wall, seeing these kinds of like old guard GOP figures, your Mark Levins, your Lindsey Graham. These are the kinds of people who President Trump is looking towards more favorably, whereas these sort of like new right ascendant figures, people who are supposed to be allies to what we believe the Trump political cause was, people like perhaps Joe Kent, your sort of influencer class, influencer adjacent class, these are now people whom the president is looking upon less favorably. And so we are kind of viewing this from the outside thinking, has he just surrendered the cause? Has he truly assimilated into the establishment in the sense that he is now just some other neocon, indistinguishable from George Bush? A lot of people made this argument over the summer. They continue to make this argument now. We are going to actually solve this problem. You and I today, literally, we are going to spend the first half of this very special episode of the John Doyle Show providing to you the accurate yet distilled history of neoconservatism, what that actually means, how that has actually functioned, how that politics actually works. Then, we're not even done. We are going to spend the second half of this very special episode of the John Doyle Show going through how we can actually beat the neoconservatives. These people are not actually the only ones acting with agency. We have agency, perhaps even better agency, even though sometimes we're a little bit patriot retarded. We will go over why we do not actually have to be passengers to our own destiny. We will go over what has worked before, what seems to be working now, what can work in the future, so that we can actually get our ducks in a row and beat these people so that hopefully our political situation becomes less immediately annoying. We will go through all of that and perhaps even more. I hear that we even have a Patriot Q&A. It is Friday. It's a very special episode. I guess who even knows what could happen? I guess we'll find out together. Do stay tuned. Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the John Doyle Show. Very special episode. We've never done a special episode before. If you've watched other episodes of this show, we hate you. None of it meant literally anything. But this episode is different. This episode is actually special. One of the challenges, I think, when you're talking about political concepts is people quite often will use the same term except very differently, as of course words are famously intended not to be used as. So sometimes this is intentional. You notice this with like leftists. They will of course redefine words to fit their agenda. We all know that in the case of like the founding fathers, for example, like when they talk about the word equality, that means a completely different thing than when some like transgender person of color who is attending like DSA meetings, like what they think that term actually means. But it's not always intentional. A lot of times it's just ignorance. Like there's a process by which, the meanings of words naturally is going to evolve over time. People call that, I guess, like semantic drift, and there are many examples of that. Like the word awful, the word awful used to mean like literally full of awe, right? Awe-inspiring. That's a pretty positive word. Now it means bad. The word gay, that once meant cheerful. Now it refers to people who don't support President Donald Trump, people who are mean to me on the internet. It's a very interesting sort of like etymology, right, surrounding many things. And there's an entire actually field known as conceptual history that studies how concepts change in meaning over time. There are lots of conceptual historians who argue that in order to understand history itself, you actually have to understand how language evolves, because at the end of the day, like words are not neutral, right? These are like incredibly powerful things, and as such, they play a very significant role in shaping politics, culture, religion, pretty much literally like, every domain of human life. And so liberalism, another great word that is often used in politics. In the 19th century, liberalism entailed supporting property rights, limited representative government, capitalism, and so on. But that did not mean, free stuff for minorities, a kind of like nanny state, socialist economics, and, and so on. But then over the course of the 20th century, that is like exactly what it came to mean. So now when you point to liberalism as like a single universal source of our woes, you really have to be a little bit more specific, because there's not just one liberalism. The word you're thinking of is libtardism, which is, of course, all-encompassing. But neoconservatism is another great example of this, because to some people, neocon refers to anyone who advocates for like a hawkish, foreign policy. They want America to maintain its position as the global hegemon, and they think that any pro-Israel sentiment is neoconservative. But I do think that's a little bit of an imprecise definition. I think that does obfuscate what neoconservatism was, and to the extent that it's still around today, still is, on its way out, suffocating though clinging to life. Now, some might say we shouldn't really care about what neoconservatism actually is, trying to accurately understand it on its own terms is pointless, maybe even conceding ground. So as long as we have this vague understanding of what it is and can agree that it's bad, that might be fine. And that might be fine for the average Republican voter whose interest in politics is pretty limited. But if you're watching this show, you are here for high IQ takes, high IQ analysis. You are here to become reality aligned. As such, I'm sure most of you understand that in order to defeat something, you actually have to know what it is you're up against. You have to, in order to distinguish between friend and enemy, you actually have to know what your enemy is. It's a very critical part of everything, not just politics. It's beneficial to winning any kind of competition. If you're a fighter getting ready for, a fight, of course, you're going to look up your opponent, find out what his specialties are. You're going to learn everything you can about his style. Is he a striker, grappler? What's his specialty? Whatever. How good is his cardio, endurance? Thankfully, we don't have to worry about that kind of situation when we're going up against the neocons. These people are pretty feckless. But nevertheless, we do benefit from understanding who they are, what they're about, what their plans are, what they want. But first, we do have to wind the clocks back, right? We have to take a little stroll down memory lane, get a little Friday nostalgia. You see, to understand the neoconservatives, you do need a basic understanding of, the conservative movement at large, because while the term conservative has been used, off and on in different contexts since actually the American founding, what we're really interested in here is how things played out in the 20th century, because prior to the arrival of the neocons, you had what is known as the Old Right, which is a term referring to the coalition that emerged in the 1930s in opposition to the New Deal. Okay, so what was that thing, right? What were those guys on about? Well, to summarize, they were against things like the welfare state. They were against things like foreign intervention, socialism, later on civil rights, and instead they were far more in favor of things like tradition, religion, which is to say Christianity, nationalism, capitalism, and anti-communism. Again, it's a very broad coalition, as is the case in politics, and so it's not as though everybody on the old right was subscribing to the same exact set of beliefs, but still there was considerable overlap with these main issues, which of course allowed them to form a kind of coalition. Neoconservatism's origins, interestingly, lie not on the right, but on the left. You have Irving Kristol, who's been dubbed the godfather of neoconservatism. This was part of he was part of the anti-Stalinist left in his youth. He was taking influence from people like Trotsky. Then you had Norm Potterhertz, another influential early neoconservative whose son reply guys me on Twitter, which is hilarious. This is a guy who got started in libtard intellectual circles, as did neoconservative Gene Kirkpatrick. So it was disillusionment with the left that led these early neocons to move rightward, whether it was the protests against the Vietnam War, left-wing counterculture, general anti-Americanism, government overreach, perceived weakness on foreign policy. These figures eventually decided to leave the left and go do something else on the right. And so when the neoconservatives came over from the left, they offered a certain amount of respectability to the right. These are people coming from similar social classes and social circles as the sort of bourgeois, libtard, managerial elite. But as Paul Gottfried and Thomas Fleming note in their excellent book, The Conservative Movement, this respectability did come at a pretty significant cost. They write, while the neoconservatives have generally added luster to conservative organizations, one effect of this alliance has been to shift the parameters of conservative respectability toward the center. Positions significantly to the right of Commentary, which is a gay magazine, are increasingly regarded as suspect. Does that at all sound familiar? A little bit of patriot cancel culture, anti-patriot sentiment. Yeah, that's a process that's still playing out today. How many times have you seen some disaffected liberal announce that they're joining the right after announcing that the left has gone too far? I don't feel freaking welcome over here anymore. Now they immediately come over. They begin lecturing conservatives on what they're doing wrong, what they're not allowed to do, establishing the parameters of how we are supposed to conduct ourselves over here. So it's rarely useful, rarely constructive, the kinds of things that they're doing. Instead, it's them telling us that the right can actually only win. We only have permission to win by being less right-wing. It's completely ridiculous. Yeah, okay, yes. Please tell me how to be a conservative guy who was shilling for open borders and child transgenderism up until 5 seconds ago. Yes, you clearly have a fantastic patriot head on your shoulders. You clearly have far better political instincts than do my friends and myself. So yeah, let me just outsource all of my thinking to you. It's just give me a break, dude. What are we doing? So what were the neoconservatives all about? Well, the thing to keep in mind is that there were kind of like two phases of neoconservatism. You had the first phase with like the neocons breaking with their old right colleagues to endorse a moderate welfare state. Still, they would criticize the left's efforts to endlessly grow the government. And as you can expect, they were very hawkish on the Soviet Union. You know, the old right was firmly anti-communist as well, yes, but they were wary of the kind of like centralized power and, you know, the fiscal cost that it would take to actually like police communism on the world stage. They were very skeptical of that, whereas the neocons viewed America's role in foreign policy to be like essentially messianic. You know, America had like a moral duty to order the world, reshape the world, specifically like in support of libtard democratic ideals. But it wasn't just that the neoconservatives disagreed with the old right about how to handle communism. They also disagreed with them pertaining to like how much of a priority it even was. Like for the old right, which was very skeptical of foreign entanglements, you know, they wanted to prioritize domestic issues, whereas the neocons, they actually took the opposite position. Like for these people, the global crusade against communism was the issue. That was the most important issue. There was an article from the early 1980s from Mr. Potterhertz. He said, "Why we were in Vietnam." And he said, "The struggle against communist expansion was the central reality of our time." Robert Kagan, another neoconservative, he essentially viewed things in a similar light, saying that the world does not stand still when Americans turn their attention to domestic matters. And it was like, okay. You know. I remember reading something a while back about a neoconservative who criticized another conservative for focusing more on the LGBT agenda more than like, you know, Soviet buildup. I think that one really gets to kind of the heart of the matter. It's like, do you care more about domestic decline or fighting foes abroad? It's sort of the question. And to the old right, the domestic issues were far more important. And the neoconservatives, whose influence would eventually eclipse their more domestic-oriented peers, foreign policy was, of course, coming first to these people. Now, to be clear, communism was absolutely a threat to America during the Cold War. At the time, people had reason to be afraid of the prospect of communism taking over the world, not to mention the potential for nuclear war. Like, that's fine. But here we are in 2026. Soviet Union is long gone. You know, the American domestic decline has actually reached a state that likely would have even shocked the sort of early neoconservative figures, like child transgenderism. That's practically dogma for the left. You're not allowed to disavow that. Mass illegal immigration have upended our historic demographics. Free trade has decimated the American heartland. Anti-white discrimination, literally just anti-white hatred, all of that is like rampant. The Soviet Union likely would have fell on its own. That's fine. It's not like our intervention in, say, Vietnam really paid off. I mean, there's a conversation to be had there, but it does seem undeniable that the old right was actually correct, that focusing on domestic issues was more important, because on a different timeline, one in which, say, neoconservative dominance of the right never occurred, I really think we would be in a better spot. I don't think that the USSR would have actually like taken the dub there. I really think that like none of the damage done to America during the 20th century was actually necessary. Like we didn't have to let in all of these immigrants. We didn't have to make anti-white discrimination the sort of like guiding ethos for the federal government, but we did. And yeah, now it's on us to sort of pick up the pieces there. And as you know, we mentioned this earlier, the old right more or less came to an end like in the 1960s, but the kind of like principles and ideas, those positions that these old school conservative types held never fully disappeared. Like they were just kind of submerged beneath the sort of neoconservative status quo that took over. And in the late 1970s, conservatives actually attempted to kind of revive the spirit of the old right. Paul Gottfried famously coined the term paleoconservative to refer to this revival. And the paleocons, much like the old right, these were guys who were staunchly opposed to foreign interventions. They advocated for kind of economic nationalism, of course, the American tradition, in contrast to something like globalist trade policies, which were invented 5 seconds ago. And then they, of course, pushed for immigration restriction. So if all of that sounds like it's ringing some bells, it sounds like it may be a bit Trumpian, or at least early, you know, Trump political project. It's because it is. It's because Trump literally went back in time and seeded MAGA in the conservative movement in the 70s and 80s to prepare people for his eventual arrival. It's wonderful what this man is actually capable of doing. But, you know, there is obviously a connection between, you know, these things, where we're at now, where we were then, even if Donald Trump has not actually entered the cheat code to achieve time travel. And that connection is that both are ultimately like rooted in those principles, right? The principles of the old right, though to varying degrees. They are based in the American tradition, unlike neoconservatism, which was the product of basically like disaffected Jewish immigrants who, let's just say, were not exactly heritage Americans. And now before you accuse me of before I get on the list, I'm just saying, you know, obviously, like, Jews have been in America since the founding, even though in very small numbers. To my knowledge, though, none of the early neoconservatives can actually, like, trace their ancestry to Jews who were in America at the time of the founding. These were, like, far more recent arrivals in America, like Norman Podhoretz, for example. He was born to Jewish immigrants from what is now Ukraine. Irving Kristol, born to Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe. Robert Kagan, born in Greece to a Lithuanian Jewish father. And there's his wife, Victoria, who was born to Eastern European immigrants as well. What about Nathan Glazer? Russian Jewish immigrants, right? So to be fair, not all of the neoconservatives were Jewish. Gene Kirkpatrick, for example, was a Gentile, not one of the chosen people who converted to Christianity later in life. But yeah, like a lot of neoconservatives were Jewish. So there's like no way around that. We're not trying to hide from that. A lot of these people actually gravitated towards the right because, again, they were upset at the way the left was reacting to Israel in the 1960s. They felt very alienated by that sort of anti-Israel sentiment, so they gravitated towards the right, among other reasons. So the reason we discuss this isn't to, like, you know, get engagement on Rumble or something, or bash Jewish people. It's just to understand that the neocons were relatively new arrivals who clearly were not in touch with the American tradition, being something that is traditionally American, traditionally Christian. So as such, we shouldn't be too surprised that they advocated for a more cosmopolitan commercial society in contrast to the kind of like traditional order favored by the old right. Moreover, this is very critical, given their membership in a minority group, neocons were able to silence their critics with accusations of anti-Semitism, racism, XYZ. And the white Protestant and Catholic conservatives who found themselves squaring off with these neocon types, they didn't wield such power. And that's because anti-Semitism has, and to a large extent still, been treated as a kind of like worse form of bigotry than hatred towards whites or Christians. And it's like, okay, why is that? Because the left gets to determine who the oppressors are and who are the oppressed people. But it wasn't just anti-Semitism that warranted cancellation from neoconservatives. You know, if you were too good on immigration, they would come after you as well. Like Norman Podhoretz, for example, denounced an article by then Chronicles magazine editor-in-chief Tom Fleming for its, and I'm quoting here, nativist bigotry. Like, that's how bad things actually were. Now, you know, so far we have been talking more about kind of the wave of neoconservatism then, but the second wave began roughly around the same time that the Soviet Union collapsed in the end of 1991. Like the neocons, for whom, of course, countering communism took primacy, they continued their sort of promotion of a sort of like, I don't know, messianic foreign policy. This, of course, culminated in President Bush's global war on terror, which was one of the most disastrous foreign policy blunders in American history. We spent trillions of dollars. We lost thousands of American lives over the course of multiple decades. And for what? For Iran to become more powerful? For the Taliban to regain control of Afghanistan, like literally the moment we left? You know, taking out terrorists that were responsible for 9/11, that's obviously justified. But the nation building, that was a disaster. And you can thank the neocons for that. The second wave neocons like Bill Kristol, Richard Pearl, Elliot Abrams, Paul Wolfowitz, all of that. You can thank those guys for that. But then something kind of incredible happened, actually, which is Donald Trump descended from the golden escalator in 2015. And he really did, I know we're not going to love this, but he really did shatter the sort of like uniparty consensus on foreign policy, because on that debate stage, he told Jeb Bush that his brother had screwed up. The Iraq war was a big fat mistake. This actually sent like the neocons into panic. If you remember, everything they'd worked for was actively being threatened by Donald Trump of all people. And this led to a lot of them literally refusing to vote, or even saying that they were going to vote for Democrats. Like, just look at Bill Kristol. That guy literally trooned out. This is a guy who served in multiple Republican administrations. He played a leading role in pushing for the invasion of Iraq while he was chairman of the Project for the New American Century. Now he's not only a Democrat, he supported Mamdani. I don't understand. This is not possible to believe. And this alarmed a lot of other like anti-Trump conservatives, by the way, like Jonah Goldberg. Jonah Goldberg was very puzzled as to why a Jewish neocon would support an anti-Zionist Muslim socialist. But that's the whole thing about churning out, right? It's about getting away from something and not looking back. It is about becoming something, literally anything else than what you are. And in the case of Bill Kristol, it's about getting as far away from MAGA Republicanism as possible. And as if supporting Mamdani wasn't enough, Kristol actually came out in opposition to Trump's military action in Iran. He posted an article in which he argued that only Congress has the right to declare war, which is probably the funniest thing you could possibly say if you are one of the architects of the global war on terror, which was not exactly declared with congressional approval. Talk about a little bit of chutzpah, right? So you had something similar happen with Robert Kagan, who literally endorsed Hillary Clinton in 2016 and began identifying as a former Republican. So Donald Trump contrary to what a lot of his less intelligent critics claim, is not actually a neocon. And actually, a lot of like the neocons, the people we're complaining about all the time, whose legacy we're complaining about all the time, these people fled the Republican Party thanks to him. And you might be thinking, well, John, what about Israel, right? Trump's a Zionist, so were the neocons. It's 1-to-1. To be clear, yeah, obviously neocons are pro-Israel. Yes, thank you for that contribution. But that was not the single defining feature, because remember, neoconservatism in its early stages was primarily defined by opposition to communism. And if it were only or even primarily about Israel from the beginning, that just wouldn't be the case. So neoconservatism does entail a lot more than merely being pro-Israel, although that's obviously part of it. It really is, I think, quintessentially like a moralistic crusade to spread liberal democracy all around the world. And Trump, whatever you think of his foreign policy, is not guilty of that. Okay, but what about like the Jewish people surrounding Trump? Well, even then, they tend to be like more orthodox types who, unlike the neoconservatives, are actually generally pretty good on domestic issues, immigration, crime, opposing DEI, and so on. Remember, the neocons were canceling people for being too good on immigration, being too good on crime. Say what you want about Mark Levin. I have never been a Mark Levin fan. I will put it that way. He's not out here trying to ruin people's lives for being like good on immigration. You can say whatever you want, but you can't say that, right? But with that said, I do see a lot of the like pro-Israel crowd in MAGA like jumping down people's throats for disagreeing with U.S.-Israel policy. And it is reminiscent of the neocons. Like not only that, but the emphasis on Iran hawkishness, like that emphasis in particular, as though that is the number one political issue in America, that too reminds me of the sort of first wave neocons, how the way that they were like singularly focused on communism, foreign entanglements. And I'm sure Mark Levin and others in that class, on paper support immigration restriction, sure, but you will never see them attack people on the right who are more liberal on immigration. They don't dedicate nearly as much airtime to immigration as they do these other issues. You will, however, see them do that to people who are deemed insufficiently pro-Israel. Stephen Miller doesn't do that, though. Patriot Miller. And, of those who do, or of those, let's just say between Mark Levin and Stephen Miller, like who do you think has actually done more to make right-wing Americans like Jewish people, right? So I think it's much more focused on kind of the actual issues that each figure thinks are important and how they weigh them. So, you could say that there's some neoconservative strains found in some quarters of MAGA. But again, neoconservatism entails way more than just liking Israel, being hawkish on foreign policy. Trump is not a neoconservative, even if the neoconservatives at times like things that he does. They do enjoy foreign entanglements. They like those taken to the extent of nation building. If Trump does something that he's been talking about for decades in terms of taking out nuclear facilities, they may obviously like that, but that's not the same thing. Because again, if these people really viewed him to be their guy, so many of the architects of this movement, which again we hate and we're all complaining about, would not have literally fled the party and began supporting Democrats. So I am content with a lot of what's been done and the progress that's been made, but we can't kid ourselves here. Because once Trump leaves, the establishment neocons are still going to try to regain control of the Republican Party. Like they want nothing more than to orient the GOP back to its pre-Trump status quo. They want to get rid of immigration restriction. They want to get rid of any real talk about crushing the left. And we can't let that happen, because if it does, all of the progress that we've made in the past decade is going to go away. It will all have been for nothing. Fortunately, I don't think it will. But all of that's going to depend on who actually takes the torch after Trump. If it's someone like J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, I could see us racking up some more dubs after 2028. But the scenario I fear is one where Republicans lose the midterms, we lose 2028, after which the neocons can kind of regroup, regain control. They can run a Nikki Haley or a Ted Cruz or something like that. So as long as there are better options, I don't think Republican voters will opt for those candidates. After all, Trump has proven that a large number of Americans like the old right ideals. They like those ideas that the neoconservatives went to such great lengths to suppress. They like order, they like liberty, they like identity. Like these are real things that actually matter to people. And so long as the right continues to deliver them, the neocons really don't stand a chance. They really have nothing left to sell. But you want to know what actually will benefit the neocons? If instead of having to pitch themselves to the American people, it was simply that their opposition went completely insane and devolved into low IQ conspiracy theories and decided that, I don't know, performative edgelording on the internet, voting for the Democrat Party were actually the path forward. Good thing nothing like that is going on, because that would be an absolute godsend to all of the worst people in the conservative establishment who are desperate to find some kind of justification for their return to power. Let's maybe get it together a little bit. Let's maybe not give them that. Let's maybe ignore the most obvious op that's ever been run literally ever by the neocons, by establishment Democrats. These people didn't stop working in politics. They simply re-strategize, and you are falling for it, but it's okay, because we are going to save you. Literally, you and I in this broadcast, we are going to fix everything. I have the fix everything button, and we're going to press it. That's what the special episode is about. So now that we understand what neoconservatism actually is, their sort of thorough, articulated, yet distilled history within the broader conservative movement to government, we can now talk about how to beat them. But first, if there's one thing I would encourage you to do prior to anything ever you would ever do in your life, you must consume alcohol. If you've had one bourbon, you've had them all, right? No, you idiot. Why do you keep falling for what people on the internet tell you? Flying Ace Straight Bourbon does not just check the usual boxes. It adds additional boxes to then check. This is a blend of carefully aged bourbons selected not for marketing hype, but literally just for being a fantastic product. And so you're getting a smooth, full-bodied sip. It's got character. You're going to get all the usual suspects, the caramel, the vanilla, toasted spice, a little bit of fruit in there, but it is still going to be bold without being harsh, complex, yet not complicated. No smoke and mirrors, just a fantastic product that is going to deliver on every pour. So if you are looking for something new that actually lives up to the hype, this is it. Go to flyingacespirits.com. Use code BLAZE for free shipping. Enjoy alcohol. Beat the neocons. It is called the 1-2 Patriot Combo. We will be right back to give you part 2 of the very special episode of the John Doyle Show. BRB. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back on the program for part 2 of the very special episode of the John Doyle Show. That simply is the case with the neoconservatives, again, being disaffected Trotsky fans. They really retain, as we've said, that Marxist impulse to believe that they can export their way of life onto the entire world, the third world in particular. And they get really mad when you disagree with that. You know, it really is about that nation building, about perfecting the individual, which is to say the individual in America or the individual in some part of the world that you didn't even know existed or something. And if you talk to any like actual neocon, you can see they squirm. They get very uncomfortable. Just like when you're talking to them about Israel, foreign aid, military intervention, all of that, they get equally, if not actually more uncomfortable if you discuss with them any kind of group difference between cultures, people, like whatever. It really is all downstream of that fundamentally leftist egalitarian impulse that they all retain. So anyway, as we discussed on Wednesday, Joe Kent, he just quit the Trump administration, former congressional candidate, longtime MAGA loyalist, kind of an America First warrior type. He walked away earlier this week and he accused the administration of launching a war against Iran at the behest of Israel rather than actually for, American interests. And so he put this all in his resignation letter. He was very blunt. He said the neocons are back in the saddle. They're dragging the United States into another Middle East quagmire while real patriots are being sidelined. And, his exit is more or less a flare in the night. I think it signals kind of that the battle for the soul of the Republican Party is far from over. The same forces that gave us those endless wars, those open borders, corporate handouts, offshoring, hollowing out, those forces are still very much embedded in the GOP, even under a second Trump term. And figures like Lindsey Graham, Mark Levin, Laura Loomer even, they continue to kind of wield this sort of outsized influence, pushing for military interventions abroad while domestic issues are not exactly meeting the level that perhaps we would like. But here's the good news, and I think this really has to be hammered down. The neocons are not invincible. Like these are not like a class of person who are protected by some shadowy force, even like an Israeli blackmail network or mystical power of sorts. Like they are successful because ultimately like they put in the work. You contrast that with the average like MAGA patriot who spends his time posting memes on X, dunking on rhinos, waiting for Trump to fix everything with a single post on Truth Social. Like the internet's not real life. Trolling like is obviously very influential, but it's not enough in many cases. These like influencer candidates who are trying to just like chase engagement on social media, they tend to flame out. This is not just this cycle. We've seen this many times in the last 10 years. We have the moment, we have the numbers, we have the energy, like we can use these things. We have the president. What we are lacking and what people seem to want to ignore is organization and discipline and willingness to actually like do things that are boring and unglamorous. Not going to get you necessarily engagement on social media, like the actual work to take over the Republican Party, because the neocons are not going to surrender power voluntarily. Famously, people in power do not do that. Like they're going to be defeated the same way that they won, through like decades of actually like patient, relentless effort at every level of the party. So again, it's not, and I know that the blackmail thing is very popular. I've never enjoyed that explanation because I don't like to believe that our political class possess a certain spine that would have to be compromised by something like blackmail. I think that probably more accurately understood, it's more of just like typical patronage. You know, if you vote a certain way, you do a certain way, all of a sudden you, as some like total loser idiot, you get to have a better lifestyle than you would otherwise. You know, you get to stay in nice hotels, you get black car service, you get to make a cushy however many hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. That's a pretty nice life. That is what you get in exchange for your soul, which is to say just being like a puppet and voting for whatever, you know, the powers that be want. I think that blackmail is more of like a tantalizing explanation. I think that that sort of channels a hostile impulse that we have towards our political class, which is totally legitimate. But, you know, I just don't think that that's exactly the whole picture. And what I worry about is that that kind of knowledge, that, you know, treating that as though that's just like literally what is going on, I think that tends to dissuade people from actually getting involved, because they think I could never get involved and do anything because they're going to blackmail me. They're going to make me like, you know, do untoward things on video. And, you know, I'm sure that that's happened at some point in human history. But again, I think that exists to basically scare people from realizing how much power they actually have if they simply, I don't know, throw their hat in the ring and stop just complaining about things on the internet. So that's not the only reason why, you know, neocons are influential. It's not just because of patronage or even, you know, releasing sex tapes that they record on like Little St. James or whatever. They also succeed because they also like work for what they want. I know that's controversial, but again, this is just like literally the case. Look at Lindsey Graham as an example. This is a guy who I talked about Wednesday. People are like, oh, so you're simping for Lindsey Graham? No, but he has been in the Senate since 2003. He knows every staffer. He knows every donor. He knows every procedural trick. He's built relationships across the party for decades. When he wants something, he gets it because he's spent years earning the ability to get it. Mark Levin, whatever your thoughts are on him, I'm not tuning into his broadcast except for when I was, 8, 9 years old, riding in the car with my dad. This is a guy who spent decades building a media empire. He's extremely popular with the base, for better or worse. He's put out books. He's got, obviously, radio syndication. He's obviously on Fox News. Laura Loomer, too. She's mastered the art of generating headlines, you know, fundraising through relentless activity on social media. Like, these are not accidents. These are actually like the results of very consistent long-term efforts in the real world of politics, rather than just something that's focused purely on digital engagement. Now, you contrast that with the average person on Twitter who spends his time churning out over every headline about how Trump betrayed us. All of that. That does not actually win elections. That does not actually put us in a better position. As entertaining as it might be, you know, a lot of these people are bored. That does not actually move the ball down the field. You've had a lot of these cases in the last 10 years, but even just now, look at what happens when influencers run for office. They treat politics like a kind of content creation. They're not building coalitions. No, they're like doing the conspiracy theorizing. They're talking about AIPAC, Israeli blackmail, like these secret cabals. That actually tends to be counterproductive. It tends to be alienating, actually, to normal voters. It's very popular on social media, alienating, actually, to normal voters. You may believe that. You may want to work against that. Why go out of your way to announce that, though, if you're trying to actually get power? Why are you trying to alienate people who would otherwise vote for you by aligning yourself with things that they view to be problematic? You know, that is not actually how you access those mechanisms. We were supposed to learn this after a certain event that happened in August 2017. It's not enough to say, well, they're going to call us racist, Nazi, freaking bad guys anyway, so we may as well do it. That's not the lesson there. Yes, the left is going to call you whatever they want because they don't believe in language. They just believe in killing you. However, in order to actually play politics, you have to get people who are sympathetic to you and your ideas on your side. You do that by presenting your ideas to them in language that they understand, and certainly presenting to them in ways that do not like literally and immediately alienate them. Just, you know, food for thought there. But Lindsey Graham also is a close ally of President Trump. Lindsey Graham stood by Donald Trump through impeachments, indictments, lots of other political storms, and Trump respects that. You know, you can get mad at him for respecting loyalty and competence, but like, again, these are traits that tend to work well in politics. Lindsey Graham has those traits, for better or worse. So the idea that Trump is somehow being controlled by Israel, that kind of ignores the obvious here, which is that Trump is like basing his decisions on what he believes is best for America. And if he listens to Lindsey Graham, it's because Lindsey Graham has like actually done decades of work to present Trump a sort of like trusting image, rather than, you know, some kind of like hidden leverage actually controlling all of these figures. And the same really goes for guys like Mark Levin. You know, Mark Levin is very loud, very visible is a diplomatic way to put it. And he's built a real influence, and he's built that through persistence. And patriots who want to beat these people and to usurp that kind of influence, you're going to beat it if you do with persistence. And you're not going to be able to just like dismiss it with, you know, conspiracy theorizing that just makes you look unhinged to normal people who actually already like these people. in the first place. Like, that's not actually like a path to victory. You know, it's not going to be through like esoteric knowledge or conspiracy theorizing. Again, that's great for a mass audience. If you want the masses to listen to you, that's great. But in terms of like organization, real politics, that's what you need. You need loyalty. You need to be relentless in that world, in real politics, right? If you want to beat the neocons, you want to reclaim the Republican Party, you've got one path. You have to literally get in there and take it over. It's the only thing that's going to work. It's the only thing that kind of has worked so far. And I think we're in a good position, but people want to just like blow that opportunity up right now. Again, literally just for engagement on social media. You know, we can all sit back and say, well, Donald Trump has to do everything. Donald Trump has to look over all of the thousands and thousands and thousands of people involved in Republican politics and freaking purge them. Great idea. But you actually need to like maybe contribute a little bit yourself. And it's not enough to just say we're going to have a candidate who's going to post memes and then they're going to get engagement on social media. Like, neocons hold power because they control the machinery. They control precinct committees. They control county chairs, state conventions, delegate selections, donor networks. They did not get there because of freaking Israel. They got there through decades of showing up, doing the boring work, building those relationships. And patriots just have to do the same thing. Like, I'm sorry, there's no shortcut. You have to start at the lowest level. You have to do boring work. You have to door knock. You have to become a precinct captain. You know, in most states, the precinct captain or the committee member is the person who organizes like local GOP meetings. They recruit volunteers. They vet candidates. They help run primaries. These positions are usually filled by like appointment or generally just like low turnout elections. Like, most people do not run for them because they seem insignificant. That's exactly why they're so important, actually. Like, a committed MAGA precinct captain can block bad candidates. They can push good candidates. They can influence who gets on the ballot in the first place. Like in 2022 and 2024, we saw dozens of examples where grassroots insurgents basically took over county parties and then sent pro-Trump delegations to state and national conventions. That's actually how like power shifts occur. You know, next you recruit, you back candidates who actually are going to implement the MAGA agenda. You don't wait for the party to just hand you perfect people. You have to go find them. You have to run them. You have to support them. You have to do the school board routine, city council routine, state legislator routine. Like, all of these races are winnable with like a few hundred votes, a handful of dedicated volunteers. And once you have that base of like local officials, they can move up to Congress. They can move up to statewide office. The neocon machine is strongest at the top because they've spent decades cultivating relationships there. And the way to break that is to build within that. Get within that, because the people who get involved in that are not necessarily like ideologically committed. They have an interest in politics. This is all they've heard for their entire life. Maybe by the grace of God, they get delayed onset red pill. That's what happened to Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk, from the moment he knew what politics was, went out of his way to get involved in it. And so we all made fun of him because he was, you know, just repeating establishment talking points about capitalism, about Israel, about whatever else. Okay, well, then he built up that power for himself, did a little bit of homework and realized, wait a minute, no, I like these ideas now. Then he became the second most important figure for us nationally, other than Donald Trump. So a lot of people who get involved in this kind of ugly, unglamorous stuff I'm talking about, it's not that they're all soulless. They just simply have an interest in politics. They're relatively normal people. Maybe they're not so esoteric. And so they more or less grow up with this stuff. They grow up listening to Fox News. This is what's normal to them. These are people who can actually be convinced that our ideas are correct, provided that you present them in a diplomatic way. And also, these are people who can actually be replaced if their ideas are less popular to voters than your ideas, which again, if you present them well, they can be. And there are a lot of things that can be done here. You know, door knocking, phone calls, registering voters, meet and greets, signature collecting. It's ugly. It's not fun, but it is what is necessary. You know, influencer candidates, they think that they can skip this step. Usually they actually just like fail spectacularly and then blame it on the fact that the establishment feared them. Like, dude, I'm not like 15 anymore. That doesn't work. I don't know. The grassroots stuff, dude, it's slow. It's a thankless job. You're going to lose races. You're going to deal with backstabbing and boredom and drama. But every precinct you flip, every school board seat you take, every delegate that you help elect, that's like a brick in the wall, dude. Eventually, that is going to build something that is quite intimidating. And Trump's first term was really the culmination of decades of work coming from people like Pat Buchanan, who, of course, ran insurgent campaigns in the 1990s and in the 2000s. He laid that kind of groundwork, like we said, for MAGA. And the second term can be the beginning of the next phase, but only if patriots are actually willing to just like stop waiting for a savior or for a collapse and start actually like building the machine themselves. Because the neocons are not going anywhere. They're doing this right now. They are plotting how they're going to regain power. They are talking about exactly what I am talking about right now. If you want to win, if you want to force them out, You're going to have to force them out basically through the same door that they got through in the first place, which is through relentless, boring, and patient work at every level of the party. So you can post all you want on the internet if you're also doing that. But if you're only doing one, I don't know, man. Get into your county. Go get involved in that GOP. Put in the work. That's how you win. You know, the internet is not real. It's kind of real, but it's not like the end-all be-all. And I think the biggest trap for patriots right now is believing that the internet is real life. I mean, these people who are very online, as I am, but whether it's Twitter, Telegram, Gab, 4chan, Discord, whatever corner of the online right you inhabit, it does feel like the revolution is happening in real time, right? I mean, you're just very online. This is your reality, and you see memes. You see people getting ratioed, influencers epically having go-off moments about rhinos. It seems like the whole freaking world is waking up. The dopamine hit, it's all very real. The problem is that none of that actually translates into actual power. You can scroll all of that for 5 days, then see a poll that says like 99% of the GOP still supports Trump. And it's like, okay. So memes are fun. Blackpilling is, I guess, entertaining. It doesn't win elections. It does not flip precincts. It doesn't actually change who is in control of the Republican Party. Look at the difference between the failures and the people who actually got through. Guys like Casey Push, James Fishback, you know, they're building very big online followings, and that's great for them. They're talking a lot about America first. Great. They're posting sharp takes. Great. They get thousands of likes and retweets and epic ratios. Awesome. Then they run for office, and both are basically in the process of flaming out against establishment candidates that nobody really asked for. Why? Because the establishment is threatened by them? Or is it because they maybe treated politics like YouTube? You know, they thought that like Twitter followers could actually translate into votes. They didn't build the local alliances. They didn't knock on doors. They didn't show up to county meetings. You know, they thought that the algorithm would deliver the victory to them. And that doesn't appear to be the case. And in fact, in many cases, they actually deliberately alienated the people who they should have been building relationships with, again, simply for that social media engagement. And there are ways to do this successfully. Like, look at Brandon Herrera. He's an influencer. He's got millions of views on YouTube. He's a gun content creator. He posts memes, very sharp political commentary. But when he ran for Congress in Texas, what did he do differently? He spent years attending county GOP meetings, extremely boring. He knocked on doors. He recruited volunteers. He built relationships with local party leaders. He presented himself well. He listened to voters, not just in his district. He didn't just listen to accounts on Twitter, you know, try to make them laugh or whatever. He actually put forth like real policy ideas that appealed to normal people. Secure borders, economic nationalism, Second Amendment rights without the sort of like performative edgelord stuff. And the result was he won his primary. He became the Republican nominee. He did not scare the hose, right? He showed up in real life. He did the work, and he was rewarded for that. He won. He did what he wanted to do. Whereas the purely internet-based model just rewards outrage and edginess, right? And it's much different than, you know, what real elections require. You know, competence, likability, persistence, all of that. And when you go too far in the online direction, you actually just alienate the normal people who actually do show up for you on election day. You scare the hose. You become a liability instead of an asset. And the neocon machine understands this, which is why they amplify that kind of stuff. They really love it. They love going tit for tat. Every time these neocon types get really mad about all the edgelords, they're not doing that because they really give a shit. They're doing that to egg the edgelords on, to give them the reaction they're looking for, to amplify them. We've discussed that. But Lindsey Graham is not one of these types. He's not spending his days owning people on Twitter, right? No, he spends his days in Capitol meetings, in meetings with donors, phone calls. He's building those relationships. He's nurturing those relationships. That is why he survives. Even when Trump is mad at him, he makes himself useful. That's what you have to do. Patriots have to make themselves useful. Said this 6 years ago. You should start a movement. Nope, Trump has a movement. Your job is to become as powerful and as useful as possible. That's the MO. And the online right is full of people, very talented, very smart people who could be winning local races, flipping county parties, building the next generation of MAGA politicians. Instead, they are actually just stuck in this like dopamine loop of getting likes, getting retweets, you know, these sort of gotcha moments. And it feels productive because for you, it's probably the most productive thing you've ever done. It's the most attention you've ever gotten, but it's not actually real. If you turn your phone off, it goes away. Whereas real power is actually built offline at the county conventions, precinct meetings, doorsteps, living rooms. Like the internet can, of course, amplify your message once you have that real world infrastructure, like in the case of Donald Trump, but it cannot replace it. If you want to beat the neocons, you have to log off for a few hours a week and go get involved literally anywhere else. That is where the fight actually happens. And it's not just that you have to get involved and be persistent. We must also emphasize the most important political virtue, which apparently for some reason everybody forgets, and they think that it's actually not a political virtue. They think that being in politics means you get to do the fun stuff, like when it's on TV and you get to betray people. So quite often what you see with like this corner of the internet is instead of doing the real political work where you actually have to do the boring stuff and get involved, they just want to speed run to the part where you get to do the fun stuff, like betraying people. It's just like completely antisocial behavior. But anyway, that is the most important political virtue, perhaps even the only relevant political virtue, loyalty. That is the currency of politics. Scratchbacks, if you want yours, scratch, right? Stand on principle, but you have to make yourself useful if you want your agenda advanced. The Republican Party is not some philosophy seminar. This is a coalition of competing interests, competing egos, competing ambitions. The people who understand this win. The people who do not understand this, they get sidelined. They can't hang. Look at Randy Fine, former Florida state senator who's become one of President Trump's most reliable allies in Congress. He is loud. He is unapologetic. And he's also completely in lockstep with Trump's America First agenda. He does not grandstand for clout. He simply like delivers votes and pushes legislation and defends the president when it counts. And because he's useful, Donald Trump trusts him. When he speaks, the White House actually listens. Contrast that with somebody like Thomas Massie, right? Thomas Massie obstructs Donald Trump's agenda when he disagrees, when it matters. He votes against funding bills. He criticizes appointments. He refuses to play ball when it comes to things that like literally we have to pass or else we're all going to die. And so, okay, what's the result of that? He is on the outside looking in. Trump has publicly called him out. Massie finds himself frozen out of key meetings, frozen out of real influence. Again, real to say not online influence. And loyalty is not blind obedience. It is simply understanding that politics is about building coalitions and creating consensus. You can disagree in private. You can push back behind closed doors. People do. Sometimes it gets ugly. People get punched in the face. But the president needs you to deliver when it's time to win. That is how you earn trust. That is how you earn power. Joe Kent's resignation, people got mad at me for this. This is a cautionary tale because Kent was a loyal MAGA patriot, a warrior for years. He ran in Washington. He built a strong base. He earned Trump's endorsement. Awesome. But once inside the administration, what did he do? He began leaking sensitive information to podcasters, criticizing the Iran war as Israel-driven rather than America first, or something that's in alignment with what Trump has been talking about for decades. And whether his critique was right or wrong is actually secondary. That's not what we're focused on here. The act of leaking undermined the president he claimed to serve. Loyalty means discretion when you're on the team. You don't actually air dirty laundry to outsiders, even friendly outsiders. And Kent's exit shows what happens when loyalty breaks down. You lose access. You lose influence. You lose credibility within people who you actually want that from, right? And the administration moves on without you. Like, that's the lesson, right? Like, if you want to beat the neocons, you have to become more useful to Trump than they are. That means you have to show up. You have to deliver votes. You have to raise money. You have to defend him publicly. You have to advance his agenda even when you have private disagreements. That's why these people survive. They are useful. Randy Fine is useful. Loomer is useful. Patriots who want to replace them need to be useful. More useful even. Not just louder on Twitter.com. You have to have coalitions. You have to be indispensable. You have to scratch backs. You have to earn trust. Loyalty is strategy. Without it, you're just another voice among the masses. With it, with that stuff, with bringing something to the table, you become the one actually shaping the future of the party. It's not a video game. You know, there are no cheat codes. You don't get victory screens. I don't know, man. You just cannot simply press the right buttons and then watch the cutscene and then all of a sudden the bad guys go away just like that. No, you actually have to like grind and lose races, and you get betrayed by people you thought were allies. You spend years in county meetings listening to petty arguments about bylaws and parking lot signs. You have to knock doors in the rain and nobody answers, and you want to kill yourself. Like, you have to do all of that stuff. You get yelled at on the phone by people who literally you agree with anyway. It's all of that. It's raising money a few $100s at a time. And after all that, then your candidate still loses by 5 points. Like, that is what real change looks like. Pat Buchanan understood this. You know, in 1992 and 1996, he ran insurgent campaigns against the Bush and the Dole establishments. He spoke to packed rooms about trade deals, about selling out American workers, flooding the country with immigrants, foreign policy that put Israel and Saudi Arabia ahead of America. He was crushed in the primaries. They mocked him. They froze him out. But he never stopped. He was like, okay, I'm going to go write NYT bestsellers. I'm going to go give speeches. I'm going to build networks. I'm going to keep that flame alive through the wilderness years of the 2000s. And without that, without Buchanan's like literally decades of persistence, there is no Trump 2016. Trump, by the way, personally apologized to Pat Buchanan for their previous spats. There is no MAGA. There's no second term. There's none of that. The guy who ran against NAFTA in 1992 laid the groundwork for the guy who tore it up in 2017. That is generational struggle. It's slow. It's extremely unrewarding at times. The glory is not instant, if guaranteed at all, but it is necessary. And the neocons understand that because they have spent decades doing that, embedding themselves in the think tanks, in donor networks, media outlets, party committees, etc. They lose battles, but they keep showing up. When Trump won in 2016, they went underground, they waited. Now it is very clear they are trying to claw their way back, right? And patriots cannot afford to simply rage quit after one bad primary, one disappointing appointment, one resignation. You don't get to walk away because the fight is hard. You actually have to stay. You have to actually like train the next wave. You have to build up the team. You have to flip the next precinct. You have to flip the school board seat, whatever it is. You have to make yourself indispensable at every level. And I think that's the real takeaway with the Joe Kent resignation. Walking away when you don't get your way, all that's going to do is leave the field open for neocons because they don't walk away. They stay. They watch you exit. So you have to stay in the fight. You have to be useful. You have to build loyalty. You have to put in the groundwork. And the generation that finishes this started decades ago with Pat Buchanan. The generation that wins this is going to be the one that actually refuses to quit. And so, yeah, we have to just understand that we actually are in control of the situation. We are in control of our own destiny. No one's coming to save us. It is our job. We have agency. The neocons are not all powerful. They hold power because they showed up, built relationships, and did the boring work for decades. We have the numbers. We have the truth. We have the energy on our side, but we really don't have discipline, and we really don't have organization. We really don't have willingness to just stop playing on the internet and start playing in real life. There was one guy who had all of those good things, and they killed him. And now everybody else is trying to dissipate that guy's legacy anyway. So don't tell me that you actually give a shit about doing anything in the real world, because when you leak, when you obstruct, when you put these like personal gripes over the agenda, you actually lose that. You lose real world access, real world influence. So that's what loyalty means. You have to make yourself useful to the president and to the movement. Randy Fine, of all people, understands this. He supports Trump's agenda. He delivers when he's needed, right? That's how you win. Other people who seek to obstruct, they're never going to have that level of influence to actually do what they believe is the right thing. That's what politics is, building coalitions, creating consensus. You stand on your principles, yeah, but you also have to scratch backs if you want yours scratched. That's how it works. So, the internet's great, but it's also an echo chamber. It feels productive. It's not. Influencer candidates who just want to chase clicks and clout instead of votes, they actually don't win. You want to look to a good example? Look at Brandon Herrera. He did the ugly work. He did the boring work, and he won his primary. Do that. This is a struggle that's going to last decades. The triumphs of today are because of all of that stuff. Decades spent laying the groundwork for Donald Trump. It was slow, thankless, brutal. People sacrificed careers. They were gatekept. Expect the same. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be really boring, but that is what is necessary. I don't know why we have an expectation that it should be anything else. Swarm the state convention. Build the team. Make yourself an asset rather than a liability. Get off Twitter. Go to a good college. Get a law degree. Do literally anything. Recruit patriot candidates. Knock doors. Put in the work, dude. That's how you beat the neocons. That is how you actually secure the future of the Republican Party. And the time is now. Start literally today, or just sit back and complain about it while neocons play the game that they've been playing for decades and play it better than you and regain control of the Republican Party. We need an army of highly motivated, highly intelligent, highly focused, and highly disciplined young guys who are credentialed and who are capable. And I just don't know that we have that right now. I think we certainly have it in a good capacity, but there are a lot of people who could be doing very good work who are choosing not to, and instead choosing to indulge in this extremely unproductive rhetoric about basically just like sitting back and waiting because accelerationism is based in red pill. It's like, dude, the keys are right there. You literally just have to go get them. I understand that there is gatekeeping. I understand that there is cancel culture. I understand that having the right ideas can quite often put a target on your back. That wasn't enough for everybody else to quit. That wasn't enough for Pat Buchanan to quit. That wasn't enough for these people who lost their jobs at these publications, at these think tanks, at these universities. That wasn't enough to make them quit. So what are you sacrificing? Your Twitter account? What skin do you have in the game that's too good to make that sacrifice? Charlie Kirk gave his life for this cause. What do you have that you can't put on the line? That's my point. You know, if you want to try getting involved, you try your best, you put forth your best efforts, and it doesn't work out, then you have my permission to bitch on the internet. But until then, maybe just have a little bit of patriot humility, and maybe, I don't know, just put your right foot forward or something. But anyway, we must now get into the Patriot Q&A. User Jonathan says, thoughts on Tarantino movies? I actually really like Tarantino movies. I know that's sort of like a basic, like, oh, me when I'm a guy who watches movies. Yo, Quentin Tarantino is pretty cool. But I do like his movies. I think that they're cool. I think he has a very good instinct for simply how to put something cool on the screen, which a lot of people just don't have. Some of them I'm not in love with. You know, he tends to have a kind of interest in these, like, you know, historical revisionist tales where the oppressor is conquered by the oppressed, and I don't love that, though in some cases it's actually like subtly based if you read into it a little bit. But yeah, I generally think he makes pretty good movies. User B Gonzalez says, what is your opinion on the church's stance on opposing the death penalty? I don't know what you're talking about. My church never opposed the death penalty until like 5 seconds ago. User Dan says, as Catholics, how should we react to leaders in the church opposing our agenda like ICE? You simply have to understand that these people are libtarded. They are not embarking from first principles. They are literally just like maneuvering politically and unduly using the influence of the church to do that. So, yeah, you know, I guess you can say, Lord, hear our prayer, but these people are not operating in the way that we would like to operate, and certainly that the church was intended to operate. User Wimston says, thoughts on the new Spider-Man trailer? I don't want to talk about it, dude. I am being raped. User Van Dyke says, confidence building tips / exercises. You have to be good at something. You can't fake confidence, dude. You can't pantomime it. You can't just like watch a guy who appears confident and be like, I'm going to act like him. I've seen people try to do this that I am friends with, and it makes for good content, but it's maybe not the best idea. No, you have to be good at something. Otherwise, yeah, what is there to be confident about?